His breath was warm against the back of my neck when he whispered, "You're not leaving this bed." And I didn't. Not when his hands mapped every inch of the silence I used to hide in. Not when the storm outside faded and the only sound left was the way he said my name like it was the only word that ever mattered. He didn't ask for permission, but I gave him everything anyway. Because that night, I didn't want to say no. If this left you breathless, leave a like to let me know, and hit subscribe if you're ready for more stories that don't just burn. They stay. The day I signed my name into a life not my own, it was raining. Not the dramatic kind that lashes windows and drowns roads. This was gentler, quieter, like the sky was grieving politely. The morning smelled of wet stone and boiled linen. I remember standing in the kitchen of the house I grew up in, my fingers curled around the edge of the sink, listening to the slow drip of the faucet echo through silence. My mother was asleep upstairs. More asleep than awake, really, these days. The illness had curled into her bones like a cat, warm and unmoving. I never dreamed of weddings. Not the dress, not the man, not the aisle. I dreamed of canvases, the raw stretch of cotton beneath my palms, the sound of paint cracking open, the weightless silence just before the first brushstroke. But dreams, I've learned, are a kind of currency. And when debt calls, dreams pay the interest. The lawyer had come the week before, crisp suit, dry voice. "Your mother's care will be covered indefinitely," he said, "and your brother's schooling. In exchange, you'll agree to a private marital contract with Mr. Ethan Hale, discreet, legally binding." I didn't say yes. I just didn't say no. The car that came to collect me was black and without a driver's name. It hummed like something expensive and restrained. The man who opened the door didn't smile. I sat in the back seat with my hands in my lap, watching raindrops chase each other across the glass. My suitcase was small. I hadn't packed a dress. They said it would be provided. By the time we reached the Hale estate, the rain had thinned to a mist, and dusk had begun to settle in the trees. The house loomed out of the forest like something misplaced in time. Stone walls. Ivy curling around shuttered windows. No lights on. A woman, stern, gray-haired, led me through the foyer. "You'll sleep in the east wing," she said. "Mr. Hale is unavailable at the moment. Unmarried and already unseen." The bedroom was too quiet. Furniture that looked untouched, drapes pulled halfway open to reveal the silver blur of the woods outside. On the nightstand, beside a lit candle and a glass of water, lay something that didn't belong to the room, a folded handkerchief, white with silver stitching around the border. Simple, almost forgettable, except for the letters in the corner. I.M., my initials. I didn't reach for it. Not yet. Instead, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at it like it might explain itself. My full name, Iris Monroe, wasn't on any public record beyond my local community college. I didn't have social media. I hadn't applied for anything since I left school to take care of my mother. So, how did he know? I touched it. The cloth was soft, worn in a way that said it had been handled, not stored. It didn't smell of detergent or perfume. It smelled faintly of cedar, and something colder, like stone. A knock startled me. The housekeeper again. "Dinner is served in the sunroom if you're hungry," she said, then paused. "He won't be joining." I nodded. I hadn't expected him to. The sunroom wasn't bright, no sun after all, but the walls were glass, and the garden beyond looked like something out of a forgotten novel. Moss-lined paths, a bench under a dead wisteria arch. Everything elegant, and completely lifeless. I sat alone, ate little. The soup was too hot, the bread too soft. When I returned to my room, The handkerchief was gone, not misplaced, taken. My skin pricked with something that wasn't quite fear, but wasn't comfort either. I slept fitfully. At some point in the night, I woke to the faint sound of piano. Not music, just notes. Slow, uneven, like someone testing whether sound still lived in the keys. I followed it. Down the hall, barefoot, fingers trailing the cold wood paneling. The sound came from behind a door slightly ajar, not fully closed, not quite open. Through the gap, I saw the back of a man, Ethan Hale. He was seated at a grand piano in what looked like a library or study. Dark shelves, leather chairs, no light except the flicker of a low fire. He didn't play, just rested his hands on the keys. I didn't move. After a moment, he spoke, without turning. "That handkerchief belonged to your mother." The words fell like stones. Quiet, but irreversible. I stepped back. "You knew her?" He turned, slowly, eyes catching the firelight just enough to turn them gold at the edges. "Not in the way you think." He stood, and the room seemed to still around him. He didn't come closer, didn't demand anything of me, just looked. "I promised her something." "Once," he said, "and I keep my promises." I waited, for explanation, for warmth, for anything. But he only said one more thing before I left the doorway and returned to the room that was now mine. "You don't have to trust me. But don't lie to yourself and say you're not curious." He was right. I was curious. And fear and curiosity, I've learned, often live in the same house. I returned to my bed, to the candle now guttering low, and the night around me breathing soft against the glass. I didn't know this man. I didn't know what he owed my mother. I didn't know why I was really here. But I knew the piano was still playing long after I closed my eyes. And I knew the room I had entered was no longer empty. The next morning arrived like a thought I didn't want to finish. It was still gray. The kind of colorless sky that makes you feel like the world has been paused, but no one told you. I dressed slowly, unsure of whether I was supposed to stay in my room, roam freely, or simply disappear. The house gave no clues. It didn't creak, didn't sigh. Just stood there, timeless and watchful. In the hallway, light filtered through tall windows dusted with rain. The corridor stretched long and symmetrical. Portraits on the walls, all nameless. Their eyes followed, in silence, as if waiting for me to prove something. I turned a corner and came to a door I hadn't seen before. Not because it had been hidden, but because it refused to be seen. Matty black wood, no brass handle. The kind of door you only notice when you're not supposed to. The air around it was colder, though there were no drafts. I stepped closer. Something in me recoiled. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was memory of closed things, buried things. The kind of silence that holds a shape. I didn't touch it. I just stood there, listening. There was nothing. No sound, no breath, no life, just stillness. And then, very faintly, as if from the back of my own head, I thought I heard someone say my name, not aloud, but as if the room had once spoken it, and it still echoed. At breakfast, the housekeeper, Marion, served tea without looking me in. The eye. "Mr. Hale is in town today. You won't be disturbed." "Do I disturb him?" I asked, almost without meaning to. She blinked, as if that question didn't belong in the room. "You are here," she said simply. "That's disturbance. Enough." Then she left, leaving a china cup trembling slightly in its saucer. The house was quiet, but not empty. I could feel it breathing. Every room seemed half filled with something unfinished. A book left open on a windowsill, a chair angled slightly as if someone had just left it. In the West Library, I found a blank canvas leaning against the wall. No brushes, no paints, just the promise of something that hadn't begun. It unnerved me. I walked, and without meaning to, I found myself back in front of the black door. This time, the silence behind it had a weight. It pressed against me, almost curious. I reached out. The door was cold, not locked, but I didn't open it. I turned away before I could change my mind. That evening, after a mostly silent dinner and several hours reading a book I couldn't remember a word of, I sat at the window in my bedroom. The garden outside had begun to fade into shadow, paths swallowed by fog. That was when I saw him. Ethan. Not in the hallway, not in the study, in the garden. Standing still, facing the empty wisteria arch. He wasn't doing anything. Just being there. The same way a statue might be placed somewhere not for beauty, but for remembrance. The candle on my windowsill flickered and I stepped back. By the time I looked again, he was gone. I couldn't sleep. The house had too many thoughts, and I could feel them crowding around mine. I threw on a robe and wandered barefoot through the hall, and again, I found myself at the black door, but this time it was open, not wide, just a sliver. Enough to see light, not from a lamp, but from candle wax running down an old iron wall sconce, and something else. A frame on the floor, canvas half finished, a figure, feminine, face turned away. My breath caught, because even though the painting was blurry, rough, and unfinished, the shape of the body, the way the neck curved, it was me. Not exactly, but close enough that my heart began to pound. Don't touch it. His voice came from the shadows like the end of a string you didn't know you'd been pulling. Ethan stood behind me, just out of reach of the candlelight. Shirt unbuttoned at the throat. Sleeves rolled. His presence was all tension, but his voice was calm. Not cold. Not cruel. Careful. I turned, slowly. You painted that? No. Then who? I tried, he said, but I never finished. My fingers itched, like they used to in art school when an unfinished piece called. To me, why does it look like me? He didn't answer. Instead, he walked past me, into the room, and lit another candle. The space was small, walls paneled in old wood, dust on every surface. It smelled of soot, citrus, and thyme. There were no windows, no lamps, no light but what he made. This room was hers, he said. I knew he didn't mean me. Your wife? He nodded once. This is where she painted, until she couldn't anymore. And the portrait? His eyes met mine for the first time since that morning. She was painting someone. A girl. A model, maybe. A student. She never told me. After the accident, I tried to finish it. But it doesn't look like her, I said softly. No, he said. It never did. The silence between us stretched long. And then he added, maybe it was always meant to be someone else. I didn't sleep that night either. Not because I was afraid, but because something inside me had shifted, like a page turning in a book I hadn't realized I was in. The morning after the painting, I awoke with candle wax on my sleeve. I had fallen, asleep by the window, knees curled against the velvet cushion, a blanket draped over my shoulders. I hadn't put it there. The fire had long since gone out, and the house was still in that early morning hush, when even the floorboards hesitate to speak. I stretched, bones stiff from the position I'd kept too long, and turned toward the window again. The garden below was soaked in pale mist, the wisteria arch nearly invisible, and beneath it, someone sat in the old stone chair. Ethan, his back to the house, his head bowed. I watched for a while, not sure why. There was something about his stillness that made me forget to breathe. When I finally left my room, I didn't go downstairs. I went to my mother's things. She had left me only a few boxes and even fewer words. One of the boxes held her old sketchbooks. Most pages were filled with unfinished figures, hands, eyes, a mouth caught in a half smile. I flipped through them slowly, but something stopped me in the middle of the third book. A name, E.H. It was written in the corner of a page in her handwriting, under a quick sketch of a young man's face. Sharp jawline, distant gaze, familiar. I blinked, not from surprise, but from the strange calm that settled in me, as if the truth had been waiting, very patiently, for me to turn the right page. My mother had known Ethan Hale, but not in the way I feared. She had drawn him once, maybe twice, maybe more. But the sketches were impersonal, observational, not intimate. She had captured his face like she would any subject, with care, but with distance. No love in the lines, no longing, only memory. That afternoon, I ventured into the garden. The stone path was slick beneath my shoes, moss-covered and narrow. The trees around the estate stood tall and quiet, like they were listening. Ethan didn't turn when he heard me approach, or maybe he already knew it was me. "This was her favorite place," he said, gesturing to the chair beside him. "My mother?" "No, my wife." I sat beside him slowly. The stone was cold through my dress, but the sunlight warmed my hands. "She used to sit here in the mornings," he said, "even after she stopped painting. She said the air smelled like beginnings." He didn't look at me. His voice stayed level. I said nothing, letting the silence work itself around us. After a while, he asked quietly, "Did she ever talk about me?" I knew what he meant. My mother. I thought of the sketch, of the single line under the initials. "Promise him nothing. He's already lost too much." I swallowed. "She said your name once, when she was half asleep. I didn't understand it at the time." He nodded. "We met at a gallery opening. She was one of the few who looked at people before she painted them." He paused. The wind picked up slightly, brushing his coat back from his wrist. I noticed his watch had stopped. She saw things that weren't obvious, and didn't say much, which I liked. He gave a short, dry laugh. "We were never close. She did a portrait for my father. I only saw her a handful of times. But I remembered her. And when I heard what happened, what your family was going through, you offered me," I said, "a marriage contract." "No." He turned then, eyes not cold this time, only tired. "I offered protection. Marriage was the only thing your father would accept." We sat in silence. A bird flitted past. Somewhere, a wind chime rang once and fell still again. "I don't hate you for it," I said quietly. That surprised him. I saw it in the shift of his shoulders. "I thought I would," I added. "But I don't." "Why not?" I met his eyes. "Because I've lived my whole life in borrowed things. This house is just another." We didn't speak after that. He stood and left before the light faded, and I stayed on the stone chair long after he was gone. I traced the cracks in the seat with my fingertips, as though the years embedded there might speak. And I remembered something my mother once whispered to me when I was 10, curled up on the floor by her easel. "There are people who won't love you loudly, Iris, but they'll stay anyway. Learn to see that." That night, I found the handkerchief again, folded on the foot of my bed, exactly as it had been before. I picked it up and held it for a long time. Not because it explained anything, but because it didn't need to. The room hadn't changed. The candles had burned out. The air was still heavy with the scent of ash and something else. Orange peel left too long in the sun. The portrait was exactly where it had been, slouched against the far wall, unfinished as ever. But something had shifted. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was how I stood straighter as I crossed the threshold. Maybe it was how I didn't flinch when the floor creaked beneath my step. Or maybe it was the way I reached for the cloth that covered the small workbench by the window and pulled it back without asking permission. Underneath, a palette, stiff with dried oil paint. A brush, snapped in half at the base. A glass jar with water turned cloudy, like a storm bottled and forgotten. No one had touched these things in years, but they'd waited, like the house, like him, like me. I sat on the stool. My fingers hovered over the palette before curling into my palm. I wasn't sure what I was doing. I wasn't even sure why I was here. Then I heard his footsteps. Quiet, unhurried. He didn't knock, didn't ask, just entered. Ethan stood in the doorway like he had the night of our wedding, still as stone, eyes shadowed, jaw sharp. But there was something softer now, something that bent at the edges. He didn't speak right away. Finally, "That room belongs to you now, if you want it." I didn't turn around. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely carried. "Because I remind you of her?" "No," he said simply. "Because you don't." That made me pause. He stepped farther in. The room did not reject him, but it didn't quite welcome him either. It held him at the edge, like a memory deciding whether it was ready to return. "Tried to erase her here," he admitted, "for years. Then I tried to recreate her. Neither worked." He came to stand beside me. His gaze didn't fall on me, but on the unfinished painting. "I should have painted grief," he said. "Instead, I painted ghosts." We sat in that silence, the kind that says everything's been said, and now what matters is what's done. After a while, he reached behind the easel and brought forward something I hadn't seen. A small wooden box. Inside, fresh brushes, untouched. Tubes of oil paint still sealed. "I had them delivered the day after you arrived," he said. "I didn't know if you'd stay." I looked at the box, then at him. And then I did something I hadn't done since. I left school. I picked up a brush. I tested its weight in my hand. Ran the bristles against my palm. Something flickered in my chest. Not joy, not yet, but familiarity. "I don't paint anymore," I said. He didn't argue, just replied almost absently, "Then this is a good place to start over." That night, I didn't return to my bedroom. I stayed in the studio, with a blanket, a single candle, and the easel turned away from the door. I began with shadows, with tone. I didn't try to recreate the figure he or his wife had left behind. I let her fade. I let my hands move on their own. My breath matched the strokes. Long, careful, unsure. It wasn't good, but it was mine. I didn't notice him return until the brush slipped from my fingers and he caught it before it hit the floor. He didn't hand it back, just sat. In the chair near the far wall, hands folded, elbows resting on knees. "I lost her on a Wednesday," he said quietly. It was raining, this exact sound. We both listened, to the rain tapping against the distant windows. She'd gone out for turpentine, the good kind. The shop was 20 minutes away. She shouldn't have driven, but she liked storms, said they made everything else feel honest. He looked up. There was no gloss in his eyes, no theatrics, just the weight of something too long carried. I told her I didn't want children the night before. She cried in this room. I didn't follow her. My chest tightened. I never got to apologize, he said. I'm not her, I whispered. He nodded. I know. That's the only reason I let you in. He stood then, walked to the door. Before leaving, he paused and said, You can paint grief too, Iris, but make sure it's yours, not mine, not hers. Later that night, I added color, for the first time. Not much. Just a streak of burnt sienna at the corner of the canvas, like the edge of something warm daring to return. I wiped my fingers on the handkerchief that had reappeared on the workbench. It didn't matter how it got there. It mattered that it was. When I finally left the room, the hallway was dark. The house was asleep. The silence felt different now. Less like absence, more like understanding. I passed his room on the way back. The door was open a crack. Inside, the fire had burned low. Ethan sat at the foot of the bed, his head in his hands. I didn't enter, but I paused, and for a moment, I was the ghost at the door. It rained for 3 days. Not the soft kind, but the relentless, insistent kind. Steady as breath, loud as thought. The house darkened. The garden disappeared beneath a veil of water. The world, it seemed, folded in on itself. I stayed in the studio. The painting had changed. I couldn't say how exactly, only that something softer had crept into it. The posture, the light, the suggestion of movement. It wasn't grief anymore. Not entirely. It was becoming a question, one I still didn't know how to ask. He didn't come to the studio that day. But I felt him move through the house. I could hear the weight of his footsteps on the other side of the walls, the creak of old floorboards beneath his decisions. The space between us had shrunk, invisibly, until I could feel it like weather. By evening, I was too restless to keep painting. I walked. Past the West Library, where the fire had long gone out. Past the long mirror in the hall, where I barely recognized my reflection. Hair pulled. Back, face streaked with charcoal, eyes wide and strange. And then, past his door. It was open, and for the first time I entered. His room was not what I expected. There was no coldness, no edge. It was quiet. Yes. Bare. Yes. But it was lived in. A low bed with navy sheets, a lamp turned low, books stacked unevenly on the nightstand, a chair facing the window, back cushion worn, a coat draped across its arm. Ethan stood by the far wall, shirt sleeves rolled, head tilted toward a framed photo I couldn't see. He didn't turn when I stepped in. "You're not supposed to be in here," he said. I know. Still, he didn't ask me to leave. I crossed the room slowly, rain murmuring on the windows. He looked at me then, and something, everything, shifted. There are silences that invite, and silences that beg. This one did both. I stopped in arms, length away. The air between us pulsed with the sound of rain, the low hum of something unspoken gathering weight. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked. He didn't pretend not to understand. Every version of it. We stood in that grief, shoulder to shoulder, and then he reached for my hand, not quickly, not like he needed to possess, like he needed to know if he still could feel. Our fingers touched. His were warm, calloused. A scar ran along the base of his thumb. I traced it before I knew what I was doing. He let me. He took a step forward. I didn't move back. His hand brushed. My jaw, slow, deliberate. He didn't lean in to kiss me. Not yet. He just looked. At my mouth. My eyes. The place between my eyebrows where my worry lived. Then, quietly, like a promise he didn't expect to be returned. "You're the first person who's ever come into this room without asking for something." I swallowed. "I didn't come for you," I said. "I came because I couldn't not." Something in him cracked open. Not all the way. Just enough. His hand slid to the back of my neck, and this time, he didn't wait. The kiss was not gentle, but it wasn't force. It was friction. The kind born of silence too long endured. My body rose into his like it had been waiting. His hands didn't roam. They pressed, like he was mapping something familiar he'd never touched. When he pulled back, I didn't speak. Neither did he. He guided me back, step by step, toward the bed. His eyes never left mine. And I didn't flinch when he lifted my shirt. Not to tear, not to conquer, to uncover. And when his mouth found my collarbone, he paused. "Tell me to stop," he whispered. I didn't. I couldn't. We didn't speak as our bodies learned each other. There was no music, no urgency, no practiced rhythm, only slow revelation. The curve of my spine under his hands. The breath he caught when I kissed the scar beneath his ribs. The way I clung to his shoulders, not to hold him, but to steady myself. The moment he entered me was not perfect. There was pain, but there was awareness. I knew his weight. He knew my hesitations, and neither of us turned away. Afterward, we lay in the quiet, breath tangled in the low light. I rested my head on his chest, listening to the steady thrum beneath skin. His hand moved through my hair, once. Then again. "Why me?" I asked finally. His chest rose, fell. A pause. "Because when you walk into a room," he said, "you don't fill it. You leave space for other people to still exist." I didn't cry. I wanted to. But instead, I just let my eyes close. And for the first time since I arrived at Hale House, I slept through the night. Not because I was safe, but because I wasn't alone. I found Asher in the rain. On the edge of the property, near the broken fence by the orchard, hood up, shoulders hunched like someone bracing for impact. He wasn't supposed to be here. He hadn't answered his phone in 2 days. The school had called. I thought he'd run back to the city, back to the friends who wore anger like armor, but instead he ran home. To the place he thought he'd never have to return to. I didn't call his name. I just stood there and waited. Eventually he turned. His face was thinner than I remembered. Eyes hollow in a way too old for 17. "You came back," I said. "I had nowhere else." He kicked at the wet leaves near his feet. "Didn't think you'd care." "I care," I said. He looked at me then. Really looked. "You care now that you've got him?" I flinched. Not from guilt, but from how sharply it mirrored my own fear. "Ethan isn't." I started, but stopped. "What? He isn't mine? He isn't the reason I stayed?" I didn't know what he was. "Mom would have hated this," Asher said, shaking his head. "She wanted you to be free, not bought." "She wasn't bought," a voice said behind me. We both turned. Ethan stood beneath the canopy of a maple tree, hands in his coat pockets soaked to the elbows. He hadn't changed since I left the house to look for Asher. Maybe he'd followed. Maybe he already knew this was coming. Asher's jaw tightened. "You don't get to talk about her." "I'm not," Ethan replied. Calm, controlled. "I'm talking about your sister." "Same thing," Asher snapped. "She's turning into someone I don't know, living in your house, sleeping in your bed, painting your ghosts." His words stung, because they found every soft part of me. The truth never needs to be loud to hurt. Just close. I stepped between them. Asher, please. But Ethan raised a hand. No, he said softly. Let him say what he needs. Asher's fists were shaking. You think money fixes things? That you can buy what we lost? You're just another man trying to fill silence with control. Ethan didn't move, but his face shifted, barely, like something behind the mask cracked, just once. And then, quietly, you're right. We both stared at him. I've spent most of my life filling rooms, Ethan continued, with art, with work, with people. Anything but honesty. Until your sister walked into my house and didn't ask for anything except space. He stepped forward. His shoes crunched the wet leaves. You can hate me if it makes it easier. But don't hate her for finding a place she doesn't have to survive. Asher's mouth parted, then closed again. His shoulders dropped. The silence was heavier than the rain. Later, in the study, Ethan handed Asher a towel and a mug of something warm. No lecture, no performance, just action. I watched from the doorway as the boy I'd helped raise sat opposite a man I barely understood and didn't speak. And maybe that was the truest conversation they could have. That night, I found a journal in the studio. Not mine, not hers. His. It had been tucked beneath the lowest drawer of the workbench, leather-bound, worn. I hesitated, then opened it. Not because I was looking for secrets, but because I was starting to understand something. Silence is not the absence of feeling. It's the last protection of it. The entries weren't dated. They weren't even full thoughts. Just fragments. She's always quiet in the mornings, like the house listens to her breathing. I dreamed of her fingers smudged with charcoal. The studio smells like her, not like perfume, like distance. I left the light on in the hallway last night. I don't know if she noticed. I don't know if I want her to. I closed the journal. My throat ached. Not from sadness, but from recognition. He'd been seeing me before I saw myself. I didn't confront him. Instead, I found him in the library, firelit and still in the same damp shirt. A book lay open on his lap, unread. I sat beside him, close, enough to feel the heat of his skin. I read it, I said quietly. He didn't ask what. I'm sorry, I added, and meant it. He didn't turn to look at me, just murmured, You weren't supposed to find that. I think, I said, I was always supposed to. We sat in silence. His hand found mine, not in apology, not in claim, in understanding, and I thought about Asher, about my mother, about all the people we carry even when we stop speaking their names. Later, when I returned to the studio, I found a new canvas. Blank, waiting. A small note rested on the easel. For what comes next. Yours, not ours. He told me nothing before we left. Just left a note on the studio easel. Be ready at dawn. Wear something warm. The road was long and winding. We drove in silence most of the way. Forest turned to coastline. Pine gave way to salt. The trees thinned, and the sound of the ocean crept in like breath through a half-open door. By mid-morning, we turned onto a gravel path lined with reeds and wind. The house appeared suddenly, whitewashed wood, a wraparound porch, shutters the color of storm clouds. It was the kind of place no one lived in anymore, only remembered. This was hers, Ethan said, cutting the engine. Before me. Before the world. He didn't need to explain who she was. The door groaned as we stepped inside. Dust in the corners, but not decay. Just a long, patient kind of abandonment, as though the house had been waiting without complaint. He moved through it like someone walking inside a dream he wasn't sure belonged to him anymore. She used to read by that. "Window," he said, pointing toward a sun-bleached armchair. Always with her knees tucked up. Said she never felt at home in her own body, but the chair forgave her. I trailed my fingers along the table near the door. On it sat a chipped ceramic bowl, still holding 3 pebbles and a feather. "You kept it like this," I said. He nodded. "I couldn't change it. I tried." He didn't look at me when he added, "I brought women here. Before. After she died. I thought I was healing. I was burying her under noise." "And me?" I asked. He turned then, fully, eyes dark, but not defensive. "I never thought I'd bring you here." He led me up the stairs. The bedroom was simple. A low bed with white sheets. An easel in the corner, blank. The smell of sea salt and turpentine still clung to the wood. "She painted this view every morning for a year," he said, pointing to the window that framed the gray-green horizon. "She never showed them to anyone. Said they were just for her. And where are they now?" "Gone," he said. "She burned them the week she got sick. Said she didn't want the world to see what she made when she was most alive. I understood that. Some beauty is too private to survive witness." He sat at the foot of the bed, elbows on knees, face buried in his hands. "She told me once," he said, voice thick, "that love wasn't a feeling. It was an allowing. That it wasn't about filling each other up, but standing beside one another without flinching." He looked up, met my eyes. His voice softened. I flinched, Iris. Every time. I knelt before him, slowly, so he could see me. All of me. "You're not flinching now," I whispered. He shook his head. "I'm terrified," he said, "but I'm not looking away." We stayed in that house 2 days. We didn't sleep together. Not like before. We made tea in chipped mugs, sat on the porch as waves dragged stones across the shore. I painted for hours without knowing what I was painting. He sat near, reading, his presence quiet and anchoring. At night, we lay in separate beds, but in the dark, we talked. About grief, about the sound his wife's laugh made, about the first time I saw my mother cry and didn't know what to do with it. We talked about silence, and how sometimes it says more than speech ever can. On the second morning, I woke early. The air had shifted, lighter. I stepped out onto the porch with my sketchbook, intending to draw the cliffside, but instead, I drew him. Not his face. Not exactly. Just his hands. The shape of them. The way one knuckle was always slightly swollen, like it had been broken long ago and never quite healed. The wind picked up. Pages flipped. I let them. We left after breakfast. Neither of us said goodbye to the house. Some places are too sacred for farewells. As we drove away, I asked him the question I had been holding since we arrived. "Why show me that part of you?" His eyes stayed on the road. "Because you're the only person I've met who doesn't. Look for the exit when things get quiet." That night, back at Hale House, I returned to the studio. The canvas waited, still bare. But something inside me had shifted. I picked up a brush, chose a color I hadn't used in years, indigo, dark, and trembling. The kind of blue that feels like the ocean holding its breath, and I began, not with a figure, not with a shape, but with the space around it. The day Mother died, it didn't rain. The sun broke through the trees in long, steady lines. The air smelled of morning coffee and wild thyme from the garden. I sat beside her bed, her hand in mine. Light, like the last page of a story she was ready to close. There were no final words. She didn't need them. She had already given me everything. Silence that softened instead of hardened. the kind of love that doesn't cling, and a memory of a voice singing to me in the kitchen when I was too young to know what loneliness meant. I held that note inside me as she let go. The funeral was small. Ethan stood apart, at the back of the service, eyes lowered. Asher cried once, not during the eulogy, not at the burial, but alone, in the garden. He let me hold him, just for a minute. After, people drifted away. The house grew quiet again, sat alone in the studio. The canvas still held the shape of what I hadn't yet dared to finish. Until now. It was almost evening when I found Ethan in the library. He was seated by the fireplace, unread book open in his lap, same as the first time. I saw him like this, only now he looked like a man who had learned how to wait without wounding himself in the process. "I need to go," I said. He didn't look up. "I thought you might." "I'm not running," I added. He closed the book. "I know." I stepped into the light, let it fall fully on my face. There are pieces of me that still need to be painted. On my own, he stood slowly, like someone coming out of water. "Then go. With all of it. And if I come back?" He didn't hesitate. "I'll leave the light on." I left Hale House the next morning. Not because I didn't love him, but because love, real love, isn't just about who stays. It's also about who lets go, with open hands, not locked doors. I took little with me, only what mattered. A sketchbook, the handkerchief, a photo of Mother on the porch bench, and the brush Ethan gave me in the room with no light. I rented a small studio near the edge of town, ocean-facing, quiet, a place I chose. And there, I began again. I painted every day, not for galleries, not for praise, just for the feeling of putting something down that had no words. I painted hands, weather, grief, stillness, the space between two people who almost speak. I sent one painting to Asher. A wave caught mid-break. He wrote back in short sentences. He was applying to colleges again. He wanted to write stories. I told him he already was. We were healing, separately, but not apart. Months passed. And then, one morning in late spring, a letter arrived, unmarked envelope, no return address. Inside, a single piece of paper. "I haven't filled your room. I haven't repainted the studio. The light is still on." I read it once. Then I packed a bag. The road back was familiar, but I wasn't the same. The trees hadn't changed, but I noticed their shape now. The way they leaned slightly into the wind. The way the world whispered instead of shouted. Hale House appeared through the trees like it always had. Quiet, certain, waiting. When I opened the door, it was dusk. Candlelight flickered on the stairwell. Wall. Somewhere down the hall, piano keys stirred. Not music, but sound. Searching, soft, unfinished. I followed it. To the studio. Where he stood, back to me, hands poised over the keys of the old upright piano. Not playing. Just listening. He didn't turn. He didn't need to. "I thought I'd find you here," I said. "I hoped," he replied. I crossed the room. Laid my hand on the piano beside his. He looked at it. Then at me. "I didn't come back to finish the painting," I said. "I came to live in the light." Later, we sat on the porch. The air was warm. Somewhere in the distance, the wisteria had begun to bloom again. We didn't speak. He reached for my hand, not to claim it, but to remind me, I chose this. In the room with no light, we lit a single candle and left the door open. If this story moved you, don't forget to give it a like. It helps more hearts find their way here. And if you'd like to stay close for more stories like this one, consider subscribing. I'll be waiting with the next quiet moment.